to ensure that it could properly get to the truth. So we pursued that. We looked at other powers around Local Government Act, around inspection powers and so on. All of those had complexity attached to them. So we asked Baroness Casey to look at this and also to look at the responses that we got from local authorities. So we looked at it, but we also asked Baroness Casey to look at that evidence as well and to make final recommendations. And that is why we have agreed with Baroness Casey's recommendations about having the national inquiry in place.
That is the end of the statement on the Casey report. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over. If colleagues leave the chamber quickly and quietly. Now come to the statement on Iran-Israel conflict, and I call the Foreign Secretary, Sir David Lammy. Foreign Secretary.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will remind the House that the Foreign Office has been responding to two crises this past week. My honourable friend, Minister Faulkner, will update the Government's extensive effort to assist those whose loved ones lost their lives in Thursday's devastating Air India plane crash. You know, just 9 days ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was in Delhi, strengthening our friendship. Our nations are mourning together, and my thoughts are with those suffering such terrible loss. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now turn to the Middle East. Early last Friday morning, Israel launched extensive strikes across Iran, targets including military sites, including the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz, and key commanders and nuclear scientists. The last 72 hours has seen Iranian ballistic missiles and drone strikes across Israel, killing at least 21 Israelis and injuring hundreds more. And Israeli strikes have continued, including on targets in Tehran, with the Iranian authorities reporting scores of civilian casualties. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said his operations will continue for as many days as it takes to remove the threat. Supreme Leader Khamenei has said Israel must expect severe punishment. Madam Deputy Speaker, in such crisis, our first priority is the welfare, of course, of British nationals. On Friday, we swiftly stood up a crisis team in London and the region, and yesterday I announced that we now advise against all travel to Israel, as well as our long-standing travel advice of not travelling to Iran. Madam Deputy Speaker, today I can update the House that we are asking all British nationals in Israel to register their presence with the FCDO so that we can share important information on the situation and leaving the country. And I can announce today that we are further also updating our travel advice to signpost border crossing points and sending rapid deployment teams to Egypt and to Jordan to bolster our consular presence near the border with Israel, which has already been supporting British nationals on the ground. Israel and Iran have closed their airspace until further notice, and our ability, therefore, to provide support in Iran is extremely limited. British nationals in the region should closely monitor our travel advice for further updates. Madam Deputy Speaker, the situation remains fast-moving. We expect more strikes in the days to come. This is a moment of grave danger for the region. And I want to be clear, the United Kingdom was not involved in the strikes against Iran. This is a military action conducted by Israel. It should come as no surprise that Israel considers the Iranian nuclear program an existential threat. Khamenei said in 2018 that Israel was a cancerous tumour that should be removed and eradicated. We have always supported Israeli security. That's why Britain has sought to prevent Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon through extensive diplomacy. We agree with President Trump when he says negotiations are necessary and must lead to a deal. That has long been the view, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the so-called E3, Britain, France and Germany, with whom we've worked so closely on this issue. The view of all the G7, who have backed the efforts of President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and for more than 2 decades, the cross-party view in this House. Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton and Lord Haig of Richmond led diplomatic efforts on the issue. Baroness May of Maidenhead and the former Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge did too. And this government has continued to pursue negotiations, joining France and Germany in 5 rounds of talks with Iran this year alone. Ours is a hard-headed, realist assessment of how best to tackle this grave threat. Fundamentally, no military action can put an end to Iran's nuclear capabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, just last week, the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors passed a non-compliance resolution against Iran, the first such IAEA finding in 14 years. The Director General's comprehensive report details Iran's failure to declare nuclear materials. Iran remains the only state without nuclear weapons accumulating uranium at such dangerously high levels. Its total enriched stockpile is now 40 times the limit in the JCPOA. And their nuclear program is part of a wider pattern of destabilizing activity. The government has taken firm action in response. When they transferred ballistic missiles for use in Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, we imposed extensive sanctions, including against Iran Air, and cancelled our bilateral air services agreement. In the face of unacceptable IRGC threats here in the UK, with some 20 foiled plots since 2022, the Crown Prosecution Service has for the first time charged Iranian nationals under the National Security Act. And we've placed the Iranian state, including the IRGC, on the enhanced tier of the new Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, a widening war would have grave and unpredictable consequences, including for our partners in Jordan and the Gulf. The horrors of Gaza worsening, tensions in Lebanon, Syria and Iraq rising, and the Houthi threat continuing. That's why the government's firm view, as it was last October in the ballistic missile attack on Israel, is that further escalation in the Middle East is not in Britain's interests, nor the interests of Israel, Iran or the region. There are hundreds of thousands of British nationals living in the region, and with Iran a major oil producer and 1/5 of the total world's oil consumption flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, escalating conflict poses real risks for the global economy. As missiles rain down, Israel has a right to defend itself and its citizens. But our priority now is de-escalation. Our message to both Israel and Iran is clear. Step back, show restraint, don't get pulled ever deeper into a catastrophic conflict whose consequences nobody can control. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister chaired COBRA on the situation last Friday and spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He is now, of course, at the G7 summit in Canada, discussing with our closest allies how to ease tensions. And the government has deployed additional assets to the region, including jets, for contingency support to UK forces and potentially our regional allies concerned about the escalated conflict. In the last 72 hours, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, and I have been flat out trying to carve out space for diplomacy. I have spoken to both Israeli Foreign Minister Saar and Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, underlying Britain's focus on de-escalation. I have also met with the Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal. I've had calls with US Secretary Rubio, EU High Representative Kallas, and my counterparts from France, from Germany, from the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. These conversations are part of a collective drive to prevent a spiralling conflict. Madam Deputy Speaker, this new crisis has arisen as the appalling situation in Gaza continues. This weekend, hospitals in Gaza reported over 50 people were killed and more than 500 injured while trying to access food. This government will not take our eye off the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. We will not stop calling for aid restrictions to be lifted and an immediate ceasefire, and we will not forget about the hostages. This morning I met with Yvette and her family, whose courage and dignity in the face of Hamas barbarism was a reminder of the plight of those still cruelly held in Gaza. We will not stop striving to free the hostages and end the war. Madam Deputy Speaker, our vision remains unchanged: an end to Iran's nuclear program and destabilizing regional activity, Israel secure in its borders and at peace with its neighbors, a sovereign Palestinian state as part of the two-state solution. Diplomacy is indispensable to each of these goals. Britain will keep pressing all sides to choose a diplomatic path out of this crisis. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. These are deeply dangerous times, and as the Foreign Secretary has already said, last week's IAEA report makes it abundantly clear that Iran's nuclear program has grown, with their stockpile of enriched uranium passing 400 kg and being enriched to 60%, which it has widely been noted is a level unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons and beyond the need for any civilian use. The IAEA Director General also stated that Iran's actions and failure to cooperate has led to a significant reduction in the agency's ability to verify whether Iran's nuclear program is entirely peaceful. We share those concerns, and the reasons why Iran must never obtain nuclear weapons are clear. The Iranian regime is a prolific state sponsor of terrorism, with a stated intention to annihilate the world's only Jewish state. Given these concerns and the clear threat Iran poses, not only to Israel, but to the wider regional stability, Israel has the right to act in self-defense to degrade Iran's nuclear infrastructure. As well as posing a threat to Israel, Iran poses a direct threat to the United Kingdom and our interest. The Minister for the Middle East stated in April in a written parliamentary answer that Iran's nuclear program has never been more advanced and threatens international peace and security. And earlier this month, the Strategic Defence Review stated that Iran's escalating nuclear program presents a risk to international security and the global non-proliferation architecture. With that in mind, can the Foreign Secretary tell us what discussions he has had with the IAEA and give us his assessment on how close Iran was to having nuclear weapon capabilities that could strike Israel and our interests in the region? Given the report from the IAEA earlier this week, what direct bilateral discussions have government ministers had with their Israeli counterparts on this matter in the last few days prior to the action that was undertaken last week? He has spoken about conversations since the strikes commenced on Friday, but what discussions took place in the days preceding? Can the Foreign Secretary update us on the discussions with our partners in the region before the strikes on Friday? And since, for example, what discussions he's had with our friends in Bahrain in light of the ceasefire agreement and with Jordan in light of the previous airspace violations by Iran? Are these discussions purely diplomatic or do they cover defensive military planning? Last week on the 10th of June, during his statement, the Middle East minister said that they were in contact with the Israeli government that day. As that was after the IAEA report on the 9th of June. Can the Foreign Secretary say during those discussions whether the nuclear threat from Iran and the IAEA assessment was discussed, or were they discussed in other matters? We also know from recent statements from the Minister that relations between this government and Israel have become strained since last July. So what message does the Foreign Secretary have to all those who are concerned that constructive dialogue and diplomacy with Israel is not taking place? And with British nationals in Israel and the wider region, what efforts are underway to expeditiously help those who want to return to the UK to come back? And while the Foreign Secretary cannot rightly give operational details to the House, can he confirm if contingency plans have been updated recently for the evacuation of British personnel and assets from Iran? At the G7, will the Prime Minister be having substantive bilateral discussions with President Trump on this matter? On Iran strikes at Israel, these are indiscriminately targeting civilians, and the whole House should condemn Iran for doing this. The UK has previously supported Israel in defending them from missile and drone attacks. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm if the UK has offered military intelligence and other forms of assistance to our Israeli allies in countering these attacks from Iran? The German Chancellor has offered this and is providing assistance to Israel. Has the UK made such an offer too? It is right that UK military capabilities have been increased in the region over the weekend. So can the Foreign Secretary tell the House whether he's prepared to take any retaliation, prepared to tackle any retaliation from Iran and its proxies, including the Houthis? Madam Deputy Speaker, although Iran's nuclear capabilities have been degraded, they are, as we know, in regular contact on nuclear issues with China and Russia, and have been for some time. Has the Foreign Secretary assessed the involvement of Russia and China that it may have had in supporting Iran's nuclear program to get to where it is today? Is he concerned that they will support Iran to rebuild their capability with materials and expertise following Israel's actions? And is he looking at applying sanctions, new sanctions, to constrain Iran's ability to rebuild, advance and accelerate their nuclear ambitions? Turning to the direct threats that Iran poses to our soil, the Foreign Secretary has rightly mentioned the plots foiled, the recent attacks, the recent arrests, and putting Iran on the enhanced tier of furs. Can he give an assurance about work taking place across government over the last few days, including with the Home Office, the police, counter-terrorism operations and intelligence services, to tackle any retaliation that Iran, the IRGC, and those acting on its behalf might direct towards us? Has the threat risk level been reassessed? Is extra support being provided to secure synagogue schools and parts of the Jewish community in the UK? We all want to see peace and stability in the region where Iran, who is responsible for so much bloodshed, is now taking place. So can the Foreign Secretary finally update the House on the ongoing steps being taken to secure the return of the hostages from Hamas captivity, the work to get more aid into Gaza, and efforts to bring about a sustainable ceasefire?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her remarks, the cross-party support that I sensed in her remarks, and for the questions that I will certainly endeavour to answer. She asks about our contact with the IAEA. I can confirm that I spoke to the Director Grossi just a few days ago, and certainly before the action last week, and discussed his report. She asks what the latest is on that, and she will know that the assessment was that the enriched uranium stockpile was now standing at 8,413 kilograms, more than 40 times the JCPO limit. And the total high enriched uranium stockpiles was considered 9 significant quantities of high enriched uranium. She asked then what coordination we had given that information, and I want to reassure her that I have been in close touch, working in concert with my French and German colleagues over this period, and coordinating the three of us, working across our political directors, but also as foreign ministers in our messaging to the Iranian regime? And can I confirm to her that we will be speaking to the Iranian regime again in the coming hours to raise those concerns and heighten what I said about the need for diplomacy at this time? She asks quite properly about our long-standing relationship with Bahrain, and can I confirm that the Minister for the Middle East has spoken to Bahrain? She asks about our long-standing relationship with Jordan, and can I confirm that, of course, I've spoken to Foreign Minister Safadi in the last few days, and we continue to coordinate with our Jordanian friends and offer whatever support we can at this time. She asks, obviously, about our ongoing relationship with Israel. She will know that our relationship with Israel remains a complex and intense one, and as she would expect, I have spoken to Foreign Minister Saar on numerous occasions, and of course spoke to him again. He was in a bunker when I spoke to him on Saturday, separated from his family. I offered him condolences, and of course, as you would expect, the United Kingdom and Israel in these times, of course, coordinate and work together. We have disagreements, of course, and we've discussed that over this dispatch box, particularly about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. But we recognise that there are many Israelis, as we speak, in their bunkers, that there have been 21 casualties over this last period and over 500 people injured. There is a sense of trauma, compounding trauma in Israel, and I want to reassure her that we recognise that. Of course, the Prime Minister is discussing these issues with President Trump at this time, and I know the G7 meeting is going on as we speak. I want to reassure her also about our contact with hostages. That's why I was meeting with hostage families just today and undertaking to raise that issue again in this place. And what they asked me was to ensure that with this crisis we do not take our eye off the situation in Gaza, and that's why I made it a part of my statement. And she quite rightly asks about state threats from the Iranian regime and the IRGC. And can I refer her to the work of Sir John Hall? He has found gaps in our legislation framework in relation to how we deal with these state threats. I'm pleased about the arrests that have been made recently, but we will be coming forward with the appropriate legislation on dealing with state threats from the IRGC in the coming months.
Select Committee Chair Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's completely understandable that Israel feels threatened by a bellicose neighbour with uranium mines and a nuclear programme. But the rest of the world is unanimous in saying that the way to deal with Iran is through discussion, negotiation and a nuclear agreement. Madam Deputy Speaker, there once was such a deal, thanks to the extraordinary efforts of Baroness Cathy Ashton, amongst others. But that deal was derailed by President Trump, egged on by Israel. And now, belatedly, even President Trump has come to the view that the solution has to be a nuclear agreement with Iran, secured through discussion and diplomacy. And yet in the middle of that, Israel has decided that the solution is a regional war. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Britain must remain firm with the rest of the world, urging both Israel and Iran to step back from a conflict? Military action can only predict one thing. It will not stop the Iranian nuclear programme, but it will ensure the deaths of innocent victims on both sides.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, she's right to put on record our thanks to former EU High Representative Baroness Ashton for all her work to get that JCPOA agreement. And it was also the work of the previous government and successive leaders in the party opposite that worked to secure that agreement. And it's hugely important that we get back to diplomacy. It is right to say, though, that the assessment of the IAEA is that there has been deception from the Iranian regime. And how do you account for having stockpiles that are 40 times over what they should be if you were sticking to the agreement? And that is why we must come together, yes, calling for restraint, but we do need diplomatic action. Iran cannot have nuclear capability, full stop.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement, and to him, ministers and officials from the Department for their efforts to support British citizens in the region. People across the UK have watched with horror as war has broken out between Israel and Iran. And as we consider the UK's response, let me begin with key principles on which I hope this House will agree. The State of Israel has a right to exist and to defend itself in line with international law. We stand against Iran's stated goal to wipe out the State of Israel and its use of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to support global terrorism and foster regional instability. So will the Foreign Secretary go further to protect UK residents, including Iranian and Jewish communities, from IRGC-sponsored terrorist actions on our soil, and finally prescribe the IRGC? Iran's ambition to create a nuclear weapon is a grave risk to the UK's interests and Israel's survival. But successive governments have been right to seek to contain that risk through diplomatic means. The Netanyahu government's unilateral military action, which it took against the advice of allies and without forewarning, has severely undermined those efforts. It was ill-judged, reckless, and not the behaviour of a responsible ally. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that the Prime Minister will press at today's G7 summit for a return to negotiations with the UK included alongside the US? Iran has now retaliated with its own strikes and may look to respond further, including by threatening the assets of other states in the region. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that the sole purpose of UK military deployments will be to protect our assets, personnel and citizens, and that he will not allow us to be drawn into this conflict between Israel and Iran? What specific steps is the Foreign Secretary taking to ensure that while the focus is on this crisis, we do not lose sight of the need to secure the unconditional release of the hostages held by Hamas and to maintain scrutiny on the extreme actions of the Netanyahu government towards Palestinians in Gaza, East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and so as to protect the possibility of a two-state solution? Will the UK government heed the call of all 72 Liberal Democrat MPs for the immediate recognition of Palestine?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his remarks and the tone with which he made them, because I think in matters of war, it's always important that this House can speak with one voice. On the issue of prescription, can I refer him to the work of Sir John Hall and remind him that what we're dealing with are state threats. And to be absolutely clear, no country in the world is deploying more state threats across the world than Iran. And that was why it was important to look at this issue specifically. He has found gaps in our architecture. We are looking at those gaps and we will come forward with our plans shortly. He rightly talks about the important work of negotiation and diplomacy and what sits behind that. It's absolutely right that we continue to work with France and Germany, and I want to reassure him that that work has continued and was continuing alongside, if you like, a parallel track alongside the work of President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and we applauded that work and that effort to get to a negotiated diplomatic solution. But it is a solution that will require Iran giving up its nuclear capability. It will involve Iran getting serious about what those centrifuges under mountains are really for. And we're pretty serious, we're very serious about that. And that's what we were insistent with, and that's why we said there would be a snapback, and we would impose very severe sanctions. Those sanctions would hit once again Iran if we didn't see compliance. And of course, he puts on record his views on Gaza, and we have exchanged that many times across this chamber.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the work of the Foreign Secretary and the diplomatic actions that have taken place so far. Israel's unprovoked attack on Iran has opened yet another dangerous front and risks dragging the entire region into a wider war with devastating consequences for ordinary people across the Middle East, people who have already borne decades of conflict and intervention. Given that Israel's claims have been challenged even by US intelligence assessments, can the Foreign Secretary assure this House that no UK military support, whether direct or indirect, will be given without the clear and explicit consent of this House, and that this government has learned the hard lessons of Iraq and Libya and will not repeat them?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, categorically, the UK is not involved in Israel's strikes. We do have an important regional role. We have UK assets, of course, in Cyprus. We have them in Bahrain, we have them in Qatar, and we have a role, an important role in Operation Shader, where we're dealing from terrible threats to us and our allies from Daesh and other things. So we have important relationships in the Gulf and the wider region, and that's why my honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has, as a precautionary step, sent further military aid to the area.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Until the people of Iran rise up and overthrow the dreadful mullah's regime, it's obviously true what the Foreign Secretary says when he says no military action can put an end to Iran's nuclear ambitions, because even if their capacity was entirely destroyed, they could start rebuilding it. Having said that, though, it is true that it's possible to contain those ambitions by knocking back their capacity repeatedly until such time as they no longer wish to acquire nuclear weapons. So I just advise the Foreign Secretary to think carefully about the question of diplomacy alone containing those ambitions, because one day we might wake up and find that a successful nuclear test has been carried out by Iran.
I'm always prepared to take friendly advice from the honourable gentleman. This is a very serious threat. We know that JCPOA had been breached. President Trump has been pretty clear in his expectations. I have been pretty clear with the Iranian foreign minister. And I recognise that the coming days, if Iran is to take the off-ramp, is to get serious about their obligations to the international community and get serious about ending that nuclear capability.
Alex Serble.
Deputy Speaker, as always, civilians are paying the heaviest price. 1,195 on the 7th of October, at least 74 hostages since, 55,000 in Gaza, 24 Israelis this weekend killed by Iran, and 224 Iranians killed by Israel. We need to de-escalate this conflict, and quickly, and the 55,000 people in Gaza deserve a future. I understand that the Saudi-French co-chaired conference has now been delayed on the two-state solution. What are we doing to get that back on track, and how are we going to progress this solution forward?
Well, I recognise that my honourable friend has been a long champion of these issues. He's right that the French, alongside the Saudi Arabians, took the decision to postpone this conference. I think that was the right decision, and he will understand that there were many partners, particularly Arab partners and partners in the Levant, that want to be in their countries at this time. There's a lot of diplomacy. He's heard the list of countries that I've been speaking to, and we must focus our effort on ensuring that we get that ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, but also that we deal with Iran's nuclear capability.
I please urge colleagues to keep their questions short and for the Foreign Secretary to keep his answers short. David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does our closest ally, the United States, agree with this position on this situation? And if not, what do we differ on?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'd refer him to the remarks that were made by Secretary Rubio on the outbreak of this new war, and I would refer him to the statements that have been made by Donald Trump, where he clearly indicates an off-ramp for Iran if they get serious about diplomacy and accept the olive branch that he reached out with Steve Witkoff.
Rupa Hogg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ealing's long had a big Iranian diaspora. In 1978, when England didn't qualify in the World Cup and Iran did, a lot of my class was supporting the latter. And now they're my adult constituents and they've been caught up in all this. So I wondered if my right honourable friend could tell me what steps he's taking to ensure safe passage of our constituents back home, including one of mine who needs to resume her cancer treatment and urgently wants to come back to England.
Well, let me just put on record the huge admiration that I'm sure many of us across this House have for what was formerly known as Persia and the great history of the Iranian people and how remarkable they are and how awful it is that they're suffering under this horrendous regime. And unfortunately, as she knows, at the moment, airspace is closed over Iran, and we have been advising for many, many, many years against travel to Iran because of our concerns. But our embassy staff will do all they can to support British nationals.
Father of the House, openly.
The Foreign Secretary knows that many of us have been prepared to speak up again and again on behalf of suffering Palestinians and be a critical friend of Israel. But would he agree, in this occasion, we must stand shoulder to shoulder with our Israeli ally? The fact is that this is a death cult. You can't appease a death cult like the Nazis or Iran by appeasement and simply by diplomacy. They're cocking a snoop at us, and they are inches away from a nuclear bomb. So will he stand, and I'm sure he's going to make this absolutely clear, shoulder to shoulder with Israel and our American ally in proclaiming the right of Israel to exist at all?
Foreign Secretary.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Damien Egan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A painful lesson of Israeli and indeed Jewish history is that when someone tells you that they want to destroy them, believe them. The Iranian regime has made its intentions to destroy Israel clear for decades now. We'll all be familiar with the term never again, which came out of the concentration camps of Europe. And I'd like to ask the Secretary of State if he agrees that this is one of those moments when we can say never again is now.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I know that, again, he has been on these issues for many, many years, long before he came to this place. And we recognise the threats that Israel is facing. And we also recognise the threat, the tremendous threat, not just to Israel and in the region, if Iran were to get a nuclear weapon. And what it would mean for all of us who've worked so hard against nuclear proliferation, because as Iran follows, others would come in their wake. We must stop this happening.
Sure.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today? Clearly, we have differences with the Netanyahu regime, but Israel is a close ally and friend of the United Kingdom. Iran is a terrorist-supporting state, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Assad, destabilising the region, rejecting the IAEA and international proposal to prevent nuclear proliferation and limit uranium enrichment, and sponsoring terrorist actions on the streets of Britain. Doesn't he feel that Israel is now doing the world's dirty work on behalf of us all?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman brings his usual eloquence to these matters. I would agree with him, save for his initial remark. I would not call it the Israel regime. I think it's a democracy, and it's a democracy with all the ups and downs and faults of any democracy to that extent. And of course, I recognise that this is an existential threat for Israel and its people, which is why I believe it's important that we ask for restraint at this time, because we don't want to see regional escalation. And it's why it's important that, that diplomacy prevails.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Iranian regime threatens peace and security around the world. It destabilises the Middle East through its terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. It supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It is sworn to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They must never be allowed to have a nuclear bomb. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that that should be achieved through diplomacy, and all of the world's efforts should be placed on Tehran to back down, to sign a deal and end this conflict?
Yes, I do.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement. The Iranian regime is a malignant international force, and who knows how many British lives have been lost to their sponsorship of international terrorism. The Iranians did explicitly state a threat towards our assets and our people in the Middle East. How much confidence does he have in our ability to mitigate those threats?
Secretary.
Huge confidence in our force protection measures, and to remind him that we have important military and intelligence assets in the region, and that we have bilateral defence relationships with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, and of course Israel.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very concerned about my constituents, Natasha, Joshua and Gemma, who are stuck in Israel after travelling there for a wedding. They sent me a desperate message saying that they're worried about their own safety and facing a daily cascade of missiles. They have registered their presence with the Foreign Office, and I have heard what the Foreign Secretary has to say today, but could I ask him to publicly reassure their families in my constituency of Hampstead and Highgate that he's doing all he can to bring British nationals home to safety?
Well, can I absolutely say that for Iranian dual nationals, British nationals who are in Iran, 224 casualties just over the last few days, 1,277 injuries. Of course, this is a terrifying time as people hide in their homes. That's why we have embassy staff working around the clock, and of course, we offer our full support, notwithstanding that the airspace is currently closed.
I've been contacted by a significant number of my constituents who are currently stranded in Israel, unable to leave because of the lack of return flights to the United Kingdom. This includes a constituent with significant medical needs. Can I urge the Foreign Secretary to further strengthen the Foreign Office's offer? I do welcome the advice they're now providing in relation to routes back to the UK, although I note it has taken some time for that to happen. But can he also update the House on what contingency plans the Foreign Office and government more generally is undertaking for repatriation should the situation deteriorate further and that be required? And are they registering details of UK nationals in Israel to that end?
Secretary.
Well, can I reassure the right honourable gentleman that we are asking all nationals in Israel, our UK nationals, to register their presence so that we know that they're there, so that we can update them in what is a very fast-moving situation. And can I reassure him that we have sent a rapid force of diplomats to the border to facilitate exit. He will understand the airspace is closed, so there is no way of leaving by commercial flight, but there are routes, particularly out of Jordan, and we will do all we can to facilitate that.
Belrabir-Adi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Chancellor confirmed that UK military assets could potentially be used to help defend Israel we are sending military aircrafts to the Middle East, which the Prime Minister has not ruled out being used to help Israel. And the Armed Forces Minister recently confirmed in a response to a written question that the UK is training IDF personnel on UK-based training courses. Does the Foreign Secretary acknowledge that through bolstering Israel's military in this way, we are actively demonstrating our support for one side in this conflict? And does he therefore accept that this undermines our calls for a diplomatic solution and de-escalation?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that it's important to state that the UK did not participate and is not participating in Israeli strikes, but we do have a proper role to play in regional security. She wouldn't expect me to comment on operational defence and intelligence matters, but except to pray and aid the defence bilateral relationships that we have in the region.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality is that there's a long history of diplomacy just being used as a cover to reach the ultimate aims of what countries want to do. For example, Russia with the INF Treaty constantly building hundreds of nuclear weapons, making that treaty worthless. And I just want to put on record that Israel has my absolute full support in the action it's taking. It's doing the world's dirty work. But what I want to ask the Foreign Secretary is he and his right honourable friend, Secretary of State for Defence, in the middle of working out how we make sure the Straits of Hormuz stay open for the very vital international trade?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for putting square the economic interests that we have at this time and why diplomacy is so important against that backdrop. Oil prices jumped to $78 a barrel. Some are predicting $125, going up to $125 a barrel. That would certainly be the case if the Strait of Hormuz were blocked. This is why this is so delicate, and let's be under no doubt this affects British people at the pump and would be a massive inflationary growth if that were to happen.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The deaths of Palestinians, Iranians and Israelis this weekend shows why we must all push for peace and stop this spiralling out of control. Does the Foreign Secretary, like me, support a nuclear-free Middle East? And if so, what steps is the government taking to also address Israel's vast nuclear arsenal, thought to include at least 90 nuclear bombs, and which, let's not forget, one Israeli minister said should be used against the people of Gaza? And what is he doing about Israel's refusal to sign up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and Israel's refusal to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Authority?
Secretary.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman that the story of Israel's nuclear ability goes back to the 1980s. Some long way. I remember studying this many, many years ago. So we work with Israel, of course, and we remain a country that wants to not see nuclear proliferation, and we will do everything we can to ensure that others do not get nuclear capability in the region.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's be clear, there are no good guys in this conflict, but international law and the concept of preemptive self-defence does not exist in international law, and nor should it. But Israel's decision to unilaterally retaliate first has made the region, indeed the world, a much more dangerous and more unstable place. So to what extent does the Foreign Secretary believe that the impunity that Israel has enjoyed for previous acts of aggression and war crimes was a factor in Netanyahu's decision to retaliate first?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that we've had a very serious debate so far in this House this afternoon that recognises the serious threats that Iran's nuclear capability pose to the global community, recognise the existential threat that the Israeli people are facing. I have been absolutely clear that diplomacy is the way. Donald Trump is urging a path back to diplomacy. The UK, of course, was not involved, but I do think that we have to be minded about the many people in both Israel and Iran who are hiding in their bunkers at this time, fearing their loss of life.
Tracy Gilbert.
I'm sure the whole House is behind the diplomatic efforts of the Prime Minister and the Government to avoid any further escalation of this conflict, and can I thank my right honourable friend for the reassurances he's given around not taking his eye off the horrors that continue to unfold in Gaza. Can my right honourable friend give a guarantee today that if there were to be any escalation, to bring in the UK, to bring in the UK dragged into any conflict, that a vote in this House would be held first before armed forces were deployed?
As this conflict escalates, our message to both Israel and Iran is very clear: de-escalation and restraint.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course all our thoughts are with the British citizens caught up in this horrible exchange, an alarming exchange of ordnance, but the Foreign Secretary said he was keeping his eye on Gaza. I'm not quite sure what that means. It's certainly the case that the eye of the world has been drawn to the footage that emerged as the missiles had flown, of young children shot and bleeding out their lives in the sands of Gaza. As you said, 50 people hospitalised over the weekend or shot dead while begging for food. And just this morning, 38 people killed while queuing for food or attempting to obtain food from the new American-sponsored distribution system. What comfort should all those bereaved families in Gaza take from the fact that he is keeping his eye on this situation?
Well, look, let me say to the right honourable gentleman, today, in my office, I was with a hostage family, a wonderful woman who lost her husband, who was there with her daughter, asking me to keep Gaza at the forefront of my mind and to raise it in the chamber this afternoon. And that's why there was an extensive part of that in my speech. I have spoken to all partners in the region. I will speak again very shortly to Prime Minister Mustafa, and we are absolutely clear that the aid needs to get in, that those hostages need to get out, and we want to see a ceasefire. And I will continue to talk and work with our American partners particularly, and our partners in Qatar, to bring about that ceasefire.
Lorraine Beavers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have spent nearly a year in this chamber watching our country pleading with the Israeli government to de-escalate in Gaza. They have not. Strong words and desperate pleas haven't worked. Is now the time to recognise the state of Palestine as we promised in our manifesto? Is now the time to extend last week's welcome sanctions to other members of Netanyahu's regime, including the Prime Minister himself? If not now, when?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I understand the strength of feeling she feels on Palestinian recognition, and she will know that we have always been clear that of course there's a role for recognition as part of a process, and we will continue to work with allies in the region and in Europe to bring about that process that brings about recognition and the two states that we hold dear.
We only have another 15 minutes to go, so long questions are just taking away from other colleagues. Christy Jardine.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and welcome particularly the measures about bolstering our consular support. But he's also made reference to our assets and the hundreds of thousands of British citizens in the wider region. So what reassurance can you give us that their well-being is being thought about and preparations being made should the conflict escalate further?
Well, let me put on record my huge gratitude and respect to our diplomatic staff across the region, obviously in Israel and Iran, but across the region, to their families and children who provide them with such support. And to be absolutely clear, we actually had in Whitehall a tabletop exercise on Iran last week Monday, which I chaired. There are contingency plans. None of us could have envisaged two crises at the same time, India, which my honourable friend will talk about very shortly, and of course this crisis. But our staff are standing ready.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you,
Deputy Speaker, and I know my right honourable friend will be working tirelessly and using all of his diplomatic skills and that of his office to resolve this immediate crisis, this new crisis. But, as others says, how will he balance this with getting aid in, a permanent ceasefire, hostages out, and recognition?
Balance it we must. Balance it we must, because those are the issues that we currently deal with, and we remain determined to press for what we want to see in Gaza, to stand up for those that we're hugely concerned about in the West Bank, and she saw the statement that I made last week in relation to that, but also to be absolutely clear about Iran's intent and capability at this time and what we must do to stop that happening.
I agree with Foreign Secretary that nuclear-armed Iran is not in Israel's national security interests, or indeed the security interests of other countries in the region, or indeed this country, which has received direct threats from the current Iranian regime. On that point, there are 8,000 UK nationals living on RAF Akrotiri, 7,500 Cypriots and others also working on base, some civilian, some in uniform, most in uniform. So what reassurance can the Foreign Secretary give those on the base that they are safe from these Iranian threats?
Secretary.
Well, he will know that we have capabilities working with partners that can ensure that our people are as safe as they need to be. And he's quite right to reference RAF Akrotiri, the work of our colleagues in Cyprus, Bahrain, Qatar, hugely important at this time.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the UN's nuclear watchdog says that Iran is closing in on the ability to develop up to 9 nuclear weapons, I worry. Does the Foreign Secretary agree it is in our national interest that Iran never acquires those nuclear weapons?
Yes, 100%.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all watched in horror as the conflict between Israel and Iran escalated, and we've heard strong voices in the House today for the UK to be a prevailing voice of restraint and diplomacy in this fragile and volatile time. While everyone here recognises the brutal nature of the Iranian regime, the focus has to be on de-escalation. So I am concerned to hear about the RAF jets being sent to the Middle East. Will the Foreign Secretary therefore make it clear the UK will play no part in any aggression, and will he explicitly rule out any further military support for the Israeli government?
This is a precautionary measure, and government would be irresponsible if we didn't account for all possibilities at this time.
Barry Gardner.
The failure to get transparent information from UNSCOM and UNMOVIC caused untold damage 22 years ago. What discussions has my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, had with Director General Grossi at the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure that there is real transparency and real information upon which we base any action?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, he will be pleased that I spoke to him at the beginning of last week, reassured him of our full support and thanked him for all his work that's ensuring that there is a common understanding of what Iran is doing at this time and why we have to act.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Does the Foreign Secretary agree that just as Russia is run by an authoritarian regime which wants to destroy its democratic neighbour Ukraine and has carried out attacks on British soil, so is Iran, run by an authoritarian regime which is out to destroy its neighbour, which is also democratic and has also carried out attacks on British soil? Is it not the case, therefore, for the same reasons we stand with Ukraine, we need to stand with Israel now?
Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman puts it very well, but we should also mention what they're doing to destabilise neighbouring countries with their proxies: Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. We absolutely have to keep our guard up in relation to Iran.
Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy
Speaker. My constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South will be extremely concerned by these developments in the region. So I thank my right honourable friend for his statement today and the efforts he is making in terms of encouraging de-escalation. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that this escalating conflict will not undermine the UK's efforts to end the war in Gaza, free the hostages and lift all restrictions to humanitarian aid in Palestine?
Yes, I will do all I can.
Lisa Roberts.
It's reported that the Israeli government planned to kill the leader of Iran over the weekend. As history shows, attempts to collapse a regime with nothing to put in its place risk creating a power vacuum and state collapse. It also risks creating further waves of refugees and instability in the energy market. So what assessment has he made of these reports and the wider implications such a strategy would have on the UK?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm hugely concerned about the appalling human rights record of the Iranian regime, but who runs Iran must quite properly be a matter for the people of Iran.
Lillian Jones.
Thank you. Does my right honourable friends agree with me that it's right the UK, as part of the international community, comes together to urge all sides to show restraint through diplomacy to prevent Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, but it's also right that our focus is not diverted from Israel's continued assault on Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine, and to secure the release of the hostages back to their families?
Every colleague that I've spoken to over the last few days has emphasised diplomacy and de-escalation. I'd want to reassure her of that.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary confirm that the State of Israel has a declared policy on their nuclear weapons of no first use, and there is no evidence that they have ever misused or threatened to misuse their nuclear weapons in any irresponsible way whatsoever? And moreover, there is in international law the right of preemptive military action. And it is hard to imagine how this would not apply in this case. Would he agree with this matter, given Iran's determination to destroy the State of Israel?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman brings tremendous experience, I'm sure, to these matters, but he'll understand it's right and appropriate that I leave this to the international lawyers.
Paul War.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the nuclear ambitions of a bloodthirsty, terrorist-sponsoring regime in Tehran pose a real threat to world peace. But, having said that, does he agree that Israel's own conduct as an increasingly rogue state when it comes to international law endangers not just the Israeli citizens, but also the Palestinian citizens of Gaza, as we've seen over the weekend, and it makes the case for a Palestinian state more urgent, not less?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'd say to my honourable friend that Israel has been raising its concerns about Iran now for years. It's an existential threat. It's one that we recognise, which is why we've been working in concert with our partners in France and Germany on this issue for so long, and it's remained a cross-party issue.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is obviously a dangerous and perilous time, and we need to do everything we can to bring about a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Can the Foreign Secretary assure us that no British weapons or components are being used to bomb Iran, which could be used as a pretext for saying that Britain is directly involved? And what assurances has he had from the government of Israel that they will not use or even consider using in any way the nuclear weapons that they possess?
Well, let me say that we've got the most robust export licensing regime in the world, and I'm proud of that, and it was a matter that this House voted on just a few years ago under the last government, and he will know that we made a decision to restrict arms sales to Israel that could be used in Gaza, and I'd refer him to the statements that I've made about Iran's nuclear intent, the work of the IEA, and the huge global concern, and the UN resolution that we secured, the UK did so much to secure just last week, Thursday.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Foreign Secretary, for his statement and the government's calm leadership in this ever-changing and seriously concerning matters. Can the Foreign Secretary, given our close maritime connections, update the House on his discussions with our Gulf allies and partners?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I reassure her that I have spoken to partners in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, and been in touch, of course, with our friends in Egypt over this last period, and I will continue to do so at this time of intense diplomacy.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We knew that Iran had the ballistic missiles to hit Europe, let alone Israel or other parts of the Middle East. Last week, of course, the IAEA reported that Iran was within a whisker of producing atomic weapons. So, in the absence of diplomatic efforts and the failure to introduce the snapback mechanism, Israel had a right to react in order to protect itself. So will the Foreign Secretary now look at the diplomatic efforts to introduce the snapback mechanism, impose sanctions on Iran to ensure they cannot ever obtain nuclear weapons?
Foreign Secretary.
Yes, I will.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his commitment to de-escalation, and particularly thank my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East. As we know, he's worked so hard over the last few days. Perhaps the Foreign Secretary could say a little more about our commitments to our long-standing friends and allies in the region, particularly countries such as Bahrain.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm so grateful for him asking that question, because this is a very tense time. If you're in Jordan, if you're in the UAE, or if you're in Saudi Arabia at this time, or Bahrain, or indeed Cyprus. And for that reason, it's hugely important that the UK meets its obligation, and that's why the Defence Secretary made the decision he did to deploy certain assets into the region.
Andrew George.
Madam Speaker, of course we should uphold the right of every state to live in peace. But in what way is the UK military involved in this? We've just heard that IDF soldiers have been trained on UK soil, and these are is this the same IDF that has been engaged in atrocities, including the murder of UK aid workers in Gaza?
Secretary.
Well, can I just say to the honourable gentleman, the UK, of course, provides military courses for our assets, but we always emphasise in all of those courses the critical importance of IHL, and it's important that we work with allies to meet the amazing standards of our own armed services, and I'm sure he wouldn't want us to depart from that.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and for making it so clear what the UK Government's actions are. However, one thing is very clear, and that is that the suffering in Palestine will continue, if not accelerate, given the situation that is pertaining in the Middle East. So what action can be taken to try to make sure that aid does get into that beleaguered area, and also what efforts can be made to make sure that recognition of Palestine is kept very firmly on the diplomatic table?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, she will know that the issue of recognition has certainly been an issue that many colleagues around the world have been speaking about just in the last few weeks. And I'd want to reassure her that I was discussing these aid issues with a hostage family just today, worried, of course, about the aid available to those who remain under the ground in Gaza.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Israel is a democracy, a pluralistic society, and it's an ally. In contrast, the unhappy and ignoble regime in Tehran is a theocracy which wants to wipe Israel from the map, which foments terrorism around the globe, and which suppresses its own people to the extent that even dancing is a crime. Is the best use of British military assets in the Eastern Mediterranean not to try to do something to stop the rain of hypersonic missiles and drones on civilian areas in Israel?
Secretary.
Well, it's hugely important that we do all we can. I believe the best way forward is diplomatically, because attempting to do this militarily, I'm afraid, cannot be achieved, and I think that's widely understood.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do want to thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement, and also for reassuring us that Gaza won't be forgotten. I also have to thank him because he was really quick to come out and ask for de-escalation and also a negotiated settlement. Nobody wants to see a nuclear Iran, not least the people of Iran who are paying for this investment by the Iranian regime. But Netanyahu justified the bombing raid starting by saying Iran was close to a bomb. They said it could be years or perhaps just months away. Was Netanyahu correct?
Well, I'd want to call to mind the work of the IAEA. I'd want to refer him to the resolution of the UN Security Council just last week, all of that confirmed Iran's intent and its deception.
Showcase Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, this House was united in supporting the long overdue recognition of a Palestinian state, and we urged the Minister to advocate for that at the United Nations conference in Saudi. This has now literally gone up in smoke, and we believe that the US and Iran nuclear peace negotiations were coming close to fruition. So does the Minister share my concerns that Netanyahu's government may be seeking to create further instability in the region, to block progression for peace, the recognition of the Palestinian state, and to distract from the genocide in Gaza?
I don't believe that that sits behind the action that we're seeing at this time. I do believe that the way forward is de-escalation and diplomacy.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A full-scale war between Israel and Iran is clearly in no one's interests, but neither is a nuclear-armed Iran. So what is the government's realistic proposal to return to diplomatic solutions as soon as possible, to get Iran to give up its nuclear weapons programme? And how realistic is it that Iran will engage in such an effort?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can confirm to the honourable gentleman that along with my colleagues in France and Germany, I expect to be engaged with Iran on this very issue in the coming hours.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Foreign Secretary said, they just repeated it, no military threat can prevent the Iranians from acquiring nuclear weapons, but surely that is not correct. Given the danger to us all from Iran, which the Foreign Secretary did acknowledge in his statement, and its continued attempts to increase its ability to enrich uranium, will you very clearly agree with me that Israel was right to strike the nuclear sites?
Foreign Secretary.
The phrase that I've used about no military endeavour can achieve this without diplomacy has been used by the US and has been used by the Israelis themselves.
Chris Cochran.
Madam Deputy Speaker, while I deplore the alleged Israeli war crimes in Gaza, that should not cloud us from our view of the Iranian regime. As a British diplomat covering Syria, I saw how the Iranian regime was directly complicit in the torture and murder of hundreds of thousands of Syrian civilians. As a British soldier in Iraq in 2020, British Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen was killed by the Iranians a few months before I arrived. But there have been too many catastrophic British foreign policy decisions in the Middle East this century. So I commend the Foreign Secretary for his commitment to a realist and hard-headed approach. And does he agree with me that the first question for any policy choice should be asking, where does this all end?
Secretary.
I'm very grateful that the honourable gentleman, although new to this House, is bringing so much experience, and I do agree with the sentiment that he's exposed.
Gangan Mahindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent, Greg, has contacted me this afternoon. He's worried about his 24-year-old daughter who's in Tel Aviv on her own. What reassurance can the Foreign Secretary give to my constituents that we will repatriate British citizens as quickly as possible?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I would first urge his constituents to register her presence, to recognise that we are surging staff to the region, that the way out at the moment is through Jordan, and to reach out to staff, and he can reach out on the hotline if that is what they so wish.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I take the Foreign Secretary back and ask that he clarifies the nature of the Israeli military personnel training on British soil, and whether those involved are participating in operations in Gaza? If so, how does this align with the UK's international legal obligations, given that Israel faces proceedings standing accused of genocide at the ICJ, given that its leadership has arrest warrants issued against them at the ICC, and given that this government has also moved to sanction senior Israeli officials?
Well, as I said before, this is an academic course, non-combat. We have extremely high standards in this country, and it's important that we share them, although in the instance that he raises, this is less than 10 people.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the UK's long-standing friendship with Israel, what assessment has the Foreign Secretary taken of the increased risk to our military personnel in the countries in the wider region?
Well, we're at the highest level of force protection at this time because of the ongoing conflict and the dangers that exist, and it's why we emphasise de-escalation and restraint.
Al Pinkerton.
Mr. Speaker, a despotic Middle Eastern dictatorship, a rogue state, a terrorist state perilously close to achieving a weapon of mass destruction so serious that it could disrupt the entire region. Members and right honourable members, as well as the public listening at home, may hear echoes of 2003 in that description of current events. And with talk of regime change again in the air, can I ask the Foreign Secretary what he is going to do to personally talk back the authorities in Jerusalem, in Israel, because what they're doing at the moment strikes me as providing the Iranian regime with the best possible propaganda tool that they could possibly have.
Well, he's right to emphasise in his words a degree of caution. He will have heard what I said in the House this afternoon, which forms the bedrock of the diplomacy that our officials are exercising in Israel, in Iran, and across the wider region.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I support the Foreign Secretary in his call for de-escalation. In April last year, the RAF participated in the shooting down of drones that Iran fired at Israel. Could the Foreign Secretary comment on why the UK acted to defend Israel from drone attack at that time, but did not do so at the weekend?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, each military situation is different. There was a particular context at that time of ballistic missiles coming in a particular request. We had the assets that could support, and we make those assessments, obviously, as you would expect, with our regional allies, depending on the circumstances and the context.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I concur with the Foreign Secretary and his view that this can only be resolved through diplomacy, and that's the only way we're going to get a resolution. But also, I know that the Foreign Secretary is a learned friend, a fellow colleague at the bar. He will understand international law. Does he agree that the Caroline principles were not engaged, which allowed Israel to conduct that strike? Does he not smell a rat with the timing of what's happening?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, at this dispatch box, I speak as Foreign Secretary, not as a lapsed member of the bar who qualified in 1995.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement. The role of the IRGC on life in Iran over the last number of years has been human rights abuses, religious freedom abuses, gender abuses, and the fact that acts of global extremism and terrorism often have their roots and support in Iran. And the war in Israel is a prime example of this. Anyone who pretends that Iran, with their nuclear potential, are in any way an innocent bystander are being deliberately dishonest. Will the Foreign Secretary commit again to working with allies such as the US to minimise bloodshed and ensure that Israel is able to remain safe and free from all attacks? Thanks so much.
Foreign Secretary.
Yes, I will, and the Honourable Gentleman's right to bring to mind the human rights record in Iran, and I remind the House that just 3 years ago they arrested 20,000 people, executed many. Many died, all because a young woman, Mahsa Amini, didn't cover herself up. She died in prison. That's the regime we're talking about.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement this afternoon, and I will allow a few moments for the front benches to change over. Before we come to the next statement, can I, from the Chair, pass on my condolences to the family of Keaton Shah, one of my constituents in Shipton Bellinger, who was tragically killed in the Air India crash. Keaton was a valued member of the local community where he ran the village stores, and the whole community is devastated by his loss. Minister Hamish Faulkner.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to update the House on our response to Thursday's devastating Air India plane crash. I know the whole House joins with me and with you in offering heartfelt condolences to all those who've lost loved ones in this tragedy. The images of those boarding the flight are heartbreaking. Families across both countries, including my constituency and of course yours, have been shocked and horrified. They are mourning and we mourn with them. Official casualty figures are not yet confirmed. However, our understanding is that of 242 passengers and crew, 53 of them are British nationals, and just one has survived. Many also died or were badly injured in the medical college which the plane hit. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has passed on our deepest sympathies to Prime Minister Modi. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has also spoken to his friend Minister Jaishankar on the day of the crash. The Foreign Office immediately stood up crisis teams in London, in Delhi and in Ahmedabad. Our High Commissioner in India travelled to Ahmedabad and remained on the ground throughout the weekend, visiting the local hospital and the crash site. We have increased consular assistance and are in contact with all the families of British nationals who have asked for our help. In Ahmedabad, we have set up a UK reception centre to help British nationals in person. A team of 4 investigators from the Air Accident Investigation Branch arrived on Friday to support work on the ground. That same morning, we also deployed 5 people of the Rapid Deployment Team to strengthen the support we are offering in person. We have also supported a British Red Cross psychological support officer now in India, helping families cope with the tragic emotional impact. We have also deployed specialist disaster victim identification experts to the ground, liaising with the Indian authority-led identification process. Here in the UK, police family liaison officers were deployed over the weekend to support families based here during an incredibly difficult time. We are, of course, also in regular, close contact with Air India about the support package that they are offering, which includes funding flights and full repatriation costs to bring loved ones home. I understand how frustrating it is for families who have not yet been able to lay their loved ones to rest, and I recognise the pain and the frustration that this is causing. The Indian authorities are working around the clock with UK support to be able to do this. Unfortunately, these processes take time, but it is important that they are done properly to avoid causing more pain to families. At the same time, we are also, of course, focused on understanding what has happened. The Indian Aircraft Accident Investigation Branch has accepted the UK's offer of help, and a team of British inspectors are now on site. Our High Commissioner met the Gujarat Home Minister Sanghavi yesterday to offer our support, and Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government continues to work tirelessly with our Indian partners to establish what happened and support all of those who are grieving. With an Indian diaspora around 2 million strong here in Britain, and with a particularly prominent Gujarati community, we feel the pain of this tragedy together. It reminds us not only of the deep personal ties between our people, but also of the strength of our partnership with India. A partnership built on trust, shared values, and mutual support in times of crisis. Just over a week ago, the Foreign Secretary was in Delhi,
celebrating the conclusion of trade talks, discussing the expansion of our strategic partnership, and meeting so many dedicated to strengthening the ties between us. In the face of such profound loss, the UK stands shoulder to shoulder with India, not only in grief, but in our shared resolve to ensure that those we have lost are never forgotten. I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Speaker, the tragic deaths of 242 men, women and children on Air India flight 7171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick on Thursday, and the reports of at least 29 fatalities on the ground are beyond distressing and upsetting. It is still difficult to comprehend the scale of this tragedy. Our thoughts and prayers continue to be with everyone affected, in particular with the families and relatives of the lost ones. All our thoughts are with those who are in hospital having suffered injuries, and with Vishwa Kumar Ramesh, whose survival from the crash is an absolute miracle, but who sadly lost his brother. Many of those who died were British, 52, and many families in the UK will have lost loved ones who were also Indian nationals too. Over the last few days, we have started to hear of the lives of those who died and the grief their families are going through. The loss of Akhil Nanobara and his wife Hannah Vaudry and their 4-year-old daughter Sarah, Javed and Miriam Syed and their 2 children from London, Hardik Avalia and Vibhuti Patel, a couple from Leicester who had gone to India to celebrate their engagement, Frognall and Jamie Greenlaw Meek, and the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Vijay Rapani. Their passing and those of everyone who died will be greatly felt, and our condolences go to all of them. The pain that they are all experiencing is clearly unimaginable. Following this tragedy, we've seen communities come together in mandirs, gurdwaras and other places of worship to pray and seek comfort in these difficult times. This evening a vigil is being organised by the Indian High Commissioner, where the community will come together to reflect, mourn and pray. I thank the High Commission's team for their support and their kindness in their consular support. I pay tribute to all of those offering support to communities across the country who have been affected, and the support shown at Troop in the Colour on Saturday will have been greatly appreciated. I want to put on record our thanks to the emergency services in India for their response. Madam Deputy Speaker, the FCDO, as we have heard, has set up a reception centre at the Umaid Hotel in Ahmedabad, but concerns have been raised this afternoon that there's not enough British presence on the ground at the hospital and elsewhere where families are going to identify their loved ones. The Minister may have seen the statement issued earlier by 3 families referring to an inadequate and painfully slow government reaction. They also said no UK leadership or medical teams and no crisis professionals are stationed at the hospital. And clearly they are asking the government to step up its presence on the ground in Ahmedabad. I know the Minister has already said that this is incredibly delicate and difficult, and we all understand that. What is the Minister's response following that statement this afternoon? And will changes be made to provide the assistance needed? Because it is deeply harrowing and very difficult, and we all understand the circumstances in which the local hospital and the mortuary are operating within. And can he guarantee consular support will be in place for as long as necessary? The pain families are going through is unimaginable, and identifying and returning bodies of their loved ones to enable funerals is clearly going to take some time. Forensics are obviously being used to help identify bodies, and families will be providing samples to help with that awful process. Can the Minister give an update on any support the UK is providing to help with this process, and in also some of this forensic work that needs to take place? Does the Minister know at this stage how many bodies have been identified? And can he give assurances that the work that is taking place across government and with local authorities and schools in the communities affected here in the UK will ensure that counselling and trauma support services are available, especially for children who will have lost very close family members? The families affected deserve answers to know what happened to the plane, and thoughts are turning to those investigations that are taking place. We know it's early days yet, but can the Minister give details of any conversations that have taken place with counterparts in India with regards to the investigations, and also with Boeing? We welcome the involvement of 4 officials from our Air Accidents Investigation Branch. Can the Minister give assurances that they will have the support and resources they need to assist Indian authorities? On the cause of the crash, will the Minister give an assurance that the UK government will work with India to get answers and provide updates to the families in particular? Madam Deputy Speaker, last Thursday was a dark, sad and traumatic day for India, the UK and all those affected wherever they are in the world. And I'm sure we all speak for the whole House when I say that we stand with them in seeking answers. We stand with them in working to give them the support they need, and we stand with them in mourning the sad deaths of their loved ones.
Minister.
I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the tone of the questions. She rightly points to the scale. This is the single largest loss of British life in an aviation accident since 9/11, and I think one of the single largest losses of British national life overseas in one incident for a long time. 10 years ago, practically this month, I was, as part of the diplomatic service, on the ground in Sousse after a terrible tragedy then. I know well the agony for families seeking to pick up the pieces after an incident like this. She asks the important question about the mortuary process, particularly traumatic in somebody else's country, and I can confirm that any British national who wishes the consular assistance to go through that process will have it from my officials. She raises, rightly, the questions that have been raised by some of the families about the location of our reception centre and the presence at the hospital. Since becoming aware of those reports, I've sent officials to the hospital. We're not aware at the moment of British nationals congregating there. I've asked officials to review the signage and general arrangements to ensure that people know where our reception centre is. The hotel, the Ahmed Hotel, where our reception centre is close to the airport because we thought that would be the best place to receive British nationals rather than the hospital where, tragically, there are no living British nationals. But we keep these questions under review. As I know from my own experience, in tragedies like this, it is difficult to get the assistance that British nationals need right first time, and we will learn lessons as each step goes through. And I've spoken to some of the families who made some of these points this afternoon.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Would the Minister please convey the gratitude of this House to the members of the Foreign Office and to the police officers who've had such difficult work that they've had to do on behalf of all of us. Public service can be very hard sometimes, but we are very grateful.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for those remarks. Both the family liaison officers and indeed the consular staff on the ground are trying to stand with British nationals during some of the darkest moments, and their work is, exactly as my right honourable friends, very hard, and we will stay with, as the Shadow Foreign Secretary asked, those affected by this situation for as long as it takes.
Lib Dem spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the advance sight of his statement. I want to begin by associating myself with his remarks and those of other colleagues in the House as to our collective grief and shock that so many lives have been lost in this appalling crash, including 53 UK citizens. I want to also express my condolences for the families of all those who lost their lives in this tragedy. This will be utterly devastating for them, and it's vital that the government ensures they are fully supported. What reassurances can the Minister provide that each of the families is receiving the support that they need and has been kept updated with any and all new developments relating to the crash? Reports suggest that investigators have now recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the flight, which should provide crucial new insights into why the plane went down. British and American teams are also on the ground supporting India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau in the inquiry into the cause of the crash. I want to thank them both for their work and ask the Minister what steps his department is taking to support them and other investigators to ensure that no stone is left unturned in the search for answers. A British citizen, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, was the only survivor of the crash. I know I speak for the whole House in expressing our relief that he is alive, but also recognise what a traumatic experience this will have been for him, including having to come to terms with the loss of his brother, AJ, who was also on the flight. Can the government outline what support it is providing Mr Ramesh and his family, both to enable his physical recovery and access to wider support?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for the question. I'm sure she'll understand why I declined to comment too much on Mr Ramesh's case in detail in this House, but we can all only imagine the agonies that he and others affected by the incident will be feeling. I won't comment too much on the investigation. It is ongoing. It will be a complex operation, and I know that our air accident investigation branch is amongst the best in the world and will do everything that they can, and they are fully supported by our High Commissioner in India and the Foreign Office to be able to do that vital work. As she says, the black box has been retrieved and further insights will no doubt be gleaned over time.
Preet Corgill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm deeply shocked and saddened by the tragic Air India crash in Gujarat, and my thoughts are with the victims, their families and all those affected both in India and here in the UK. Air India is an important operator for many of my constituents, especially in the Indian diaspora. Around 100 Air India flights arrive to Birmingham Airport every month. What reassurances can the Minister provide my constituents that the UK Government is supporting efforts to determine the cause of the Air India crash with our Indian counterparts?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, British investigators are now in India working with the Indian authorities, and we are also in direct contact with Air India.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Around 30% of my constituents emanate from Gujarat originally. And on Saturday, we came together in one of the Hindu temples with the Interfaith Council, with people of all religions and none, expressing their condolences. That's a temple where 20 people have lost relatives. And indeed, on last night, we attended another vigil where more than four relatives of those people that work in the temple had lost their lives. Can the Minister just update us on one issue, which is for the 53 UK nationals that sadly lost their lives, we've been able, I think, to communicate to those families that unfortunately they've died. But there were 169 Indian nationals who are visiting, almost certainly visiting, or due to visit their families in the UK, and those families are extended across the United Kingdom. Has the FCDO been able to advise those families, I'm afraid, of the loss of those lives, so that instead of being literally by the telephone waiting in hope that their relatives weren't on the plane, that they know the certain outcome?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to talk to the honourable member about the particulars of the cases he's referring to. We will, of course, do everything we can to try and minimise uncertainty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think all members will think about the victims in their thoughts and prayers. I'd like to thank the firefighters, the first responders, the emergency service workers who helped out at the crash. On Saturday at Manchester Cathedral, the Mahatma Gandhi statue, there was a vigil held, and I was one of the speakers, including the Honourable Member for Manchester, Rusholme and Bolton West. We had prayers from a local Hindu priest, an imam, a member of the Sikh community, and the Dean of Manchester Cathedral. I know the Minister mentioned the British High Commissioner in India, Her Excellency Linda Cameron. She's doing a very important job. Can I have assurance from the Minister that the FCDO team, the High Commissioner's team in Delhi, but also the Deputy High Commissioner in Ahmedabad, will have all the support, the resources that they need to make sure that people have the support, the victims and the families?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've spoken to our High Commissioner this afternoon, and indeed the team on the ground, to ensure that we have adequate resources in place, including at the places where British nationals and their families might be congregating, in order to ensure